All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really brilliant piece of political comedy from The Daily Show. We're going to break down exactly how comedian Jon Stewart constructs this satire by weaving together recent geopolitical events and the very relatable anxieties of graduation season. So, whether you're a hardcore political junkie or you just kind of appreciate the nuts and bolts of a perfectly crafted joke, examining the structure of this monologue gives us a fantastic window into how satire processes real-world events.
Here's our roadmap for the breakdown. We're going to hit Trump's stance on China, the satirical interview method, tackling standard interview questions, deflecting personal hobby inquiries, vetting and background checks, and finally, the ultimate satirical lesson.
Starting us off with Section 1, Trump's stance on China.
Stewart actually kicks off his monologue by laying down a solid geopolitical premise. It's all built on this absolutely massive contrast. On one hand, you've got the established political branding, the loud claims of being historically incredibly tough on China. But then he places that right up against the reality of a diplomatic trip that featured some heavily deferential praise of President Xi. Stewart points out that instead of projecting dominance, Trump actually told Xi he was a great leader, whom he respects greatly. The whole joke literally hinges on this gaping chasm between the tough talk and the highly complimentary reality.
Now, to really dial up the absurdity before his main pivot, Stewart just objectively lists out the actual takeaways from this trip. Did the US get trade barriers reduced? Nope. Any help with Iran? No way. Instead, Stewart jokes that the big win was getting onto President Xi's close friend story on social media and, scoring some superficial compliments, like Xi allegedly calling the US the hottest country. By highlighting these completely superficial wins over actual concrete policy, he's showing us a strategy that totally defies conventional logic. And honestly, it's that exact defiance of logic that gives him the perfect runway for the rest of the segment.
Which brings us to Section 2, the satirical interview method.
So here comes the pivot. Stewart asks a really clever transitional question. If this totally unconventional, seemingly illogical approach works in global politics, well, shouldn't we apply it to everyday life? He then maps his political critique right onto the 4 standard phases of a corporate job interview. He makes this totally satirical argument that conventional career advice, like, honesty and hard work, might actually have it completely backwards. Instead, he pitches learning the Trump way, wrapping his whole critique of the former president inside something we've all sweated through, trying to get hired.
Okay, starting with Phase 1, the introduction. We get a direct, side-by-side comparison. Traditional advice, offer a firm grip, make polite eye contact, but the Trump way? Stewart says you gotta physically yank the interviewer's hand to establish immediate, aggressive dominance. He jokes that your prospective employer needs to know that you are the captain now, and that a truly successful interview leaves the employer's hand looking just completely grotesque. It's this highly physical, vivid joke that sets the perfect tone for all the bizarre advice it's about to drop.
Moving right along to Section 3, tackling standard interview questions. Now, what is absolutely fascinating about this next phase is how Stewart takes real political rhetoric, actual quotes from Donald Trump, and uses them to answer the most mundane HR questions. So instead of showing normal humility when asked, "Why are you a good fit?" Stewart tells his mock graduates to drop these exact quotes. You don't talk about your GPA or coursework. You just declare, "I guarantee my IQ is much higher," or "I have the best words," and that you have a very, very fertile brain. He's using this to show a wildly boastful approach that just entirely shatters the normal dynamic of an eager applicant trying to impress a boss.
The contrast he builds here is just striking. Think about it. When asked, "Why work here?" the normal move is to show how eager you are to contribute, right? But the Trump strategy? Stewart jokes you should state you didn't even need the job in the first place, and casually mention you could be out sunbathing nude on the beach instead. And when they ask for your biggest weakness, a normal person offers a little honest self-reflection. The satirical Trump way is to just flat-out refuse to answer, while maybe secretly admitting to being totally reckless and corrupt, or claiming your good looks just make everyone uncomfortable. He takes standard pro forma interview responses and swaps them out for these completely bizarre deflections.
And the whole thing really peaks with the classic obstacle question. When the mock interviewer asks about a time you struggled, Stewart brings up that incredibly famous financial quote. Instead of a relatable story about, working the night shift to pay for college, the Trump way is to complain that you had to start off in Brooklyn with nothing but a small loan of $1 million. It completely turns the expectation of humility and self-awareness absolutely on its head.
Next up is Section 4, deflecting personal hobby inquiries.
So as we move into the personal questions, Stewart shows us how the Trump way handles small talk, like reading habits. Interviewers love asking, "What's your favorite book?" just to break the ice. Well, Stewart brings up that famous moment where the former president completely aced this test by claiming the Bible is his absolute favorite book. It's the ultimate unbeatable answer, right? It makes the candidate look impeccably moral. But, as we all know, in a real interview, there's always a follow-up.
And this is exactly where the joke structurally lands. When the interviewer naturally asks for a favorite verse from this beloved book, Stewart plays the clip of the immediate refusal to name even a single one. The defense? Suddenly the topic is, quote-unquote, very personal. Stewart is highlighting a brilliant tactical evasion here. You aggressively claim the high moral ground, and then you completely shut down any attempt to actually verify it, all under the guise of privacy. Okay, but what if the employer politely pushes back? Well, Stewart notes that the satirical strategy here is just total alienation. You do not calmly answer. No, you refuse the premise of the question entirely. You attack the interviewer's attitude, you label their completely standard inquiry a nasty question, and for the grand finale, you literally call the interviewer an evil person. Stewart points out that while this seems completely insane for someone trying to get a job, it's the exact same behavior that effectively shielded Trump in the political arena.
All right, on to Section 5, vetting and background checks.
So let's say, against all odds, you survived a face-to-face questions. Now comes social media vetting. Career counselors will always tell you to clean up your profile, or at least have a very cogent, believable excuse for weird posts. The Trump rule, though? Stewart highlights a real instance where Trump shared a totally bizarre AI-generated image of himself as Jesus, or like a messianic doctor healing the sick. Instead of hiding it, the strategy is to openly embrace the most unbelievably grandiose post possible. It is a total, unapologetic rejection of caution.
And then comes the final hurdle, checking references. Stewart caps off this mock hiring process by showing us what happens when you call up the specific candidate's high-level references, specifically former Chief of Staff John Kelly and former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Now, for any normal job, if your references called you a fascist and an effing moron, your application is going straight into the shredder. But in the upside-down world of Stewart's Guide, that means you absolutely nailed it. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the ultimate satirical lesson. Stewart wraps up the whole bit with an incredibly cynical punchline about what a successful graduate should do after they actually secure the job. He pulls in real-world news items for this final blow, referencing the creation of a $1.7 billion fund financed by taxpayers, along with the dropping of a $10 billion lawsuit against the federal government. He uses these massive financial figures to represent the final, ultimate satirical step. Once you've secured the gig through sheer arrogance and deflection, your very last move is to blatantly take from the exact entity that just hired you. It's a really grim, punchy end to his mock career seminar.
So, I want to leave you with this to chew on. By taking a step back and really analyzing the architecture of a comedian's monologue, seeing exactly how Stewart mapped massive political controversies right onto the everyday stress of a job interview, does it give us a clearer, more objective lens to view our political landscape? When we map out comedy scientifically like this, it kind of reveals the hidden absurdities in the everyday rhetoric we've somehow just gotten used to, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking questions.